Hello and welcome to another episode of Booze and Brews. We are back, and I am your host, Christina Kieffer, and here's where I talk about haunted historic location while I drink the coffee of the day. And today's coffee, it's from Old School Coffee Shop in downtown Lexington, Kentucky, and I was lazy today, and I didn't want to make my coffee, so I went and bought it instead. And it just so happens that the actual coffee shop is located in a historic building itself. It's the historic Dudley Square building. That building was actually built in 1881, and it actually served also as a public school. Today I got the s'mores latte. It has like a chocolate graham cracker flavor to it. It's pretty good, and I would recommend this one. I've only been to this location a few other times, and so far everything that I've had there has been pretty good. So now on to our haunted location, which is Alcatraz. This is going to be a two-part episode just because there's a lot of information out there on Alcatraz, and I'm trying to narrow it down to just important stuff, so here we go. So Alcatraz is a penitentiary located on Alcatraz Island. I'm going to start by giving a history of the island itself and how Alcatraz came to be. The island, also known as The Rock, is an island located about a 1.25 miles off of San Francisco's coast. The island itself is approximately 22 acres, and it served as a prison from 1861 to 1963. Now, the island was first discovered in 1775 by Spanish explorers, and in 1851, the United States started making plans for the construction of 3 new forts and batteries on the island. Construction started in 1854, and it was not until finally about June 1st, 1854, when the first lighthouse was completed on the island. The black and white trim lighthouse was built in a Cape Cod style 2-story cottage. The Alcatraz lighthouse would be the first lighthouse to be actually built on the Pacific coast, and the fortification of the island followed soon after. And in 1857, the guardhouse was eventually completed, and as additional construction activities continued, tragedy would strike Alcatraz Island, of course, as we are here on Booze and Brews, and in the early years of its habitation. And July 9th of 1857, a crew of 3 men were excavating a cliff between the wharf and the guardhouse, and they would trigger a landslide that would take the lives of 2 of the men, Daniel Pooter and Jacob Unger. They would be the first fatalities on the island. Now, the fortification on the island would continue into completion. Unfortunately, the stone had to be transported into the island because the stone on the island was too fragile. So in 1859, when the first military command of the island took place, and it encompassed 86 men of Company H under Captain Joseph Stewart. That same year, Alcatraz had its first military prisoners brought to the island. Now, on April 12th of 1861 was the start of the Civil War, and the Union General Edward Sumner would take command of Alcatraz against the Confederate Army. Excuse me. And that same year, the Civil War prisoners were sent to Alcatraz. And the prisoners were kept in the basement, unfortunately, of the guardhouse, because at this point there was no actual official prison facilities on the island. And so the conditions there were almost like a medieval dungeon. It was only accessible through a hatch in the ceiling, and it was unheated, and there was no plumbing, of course. And inmates had to relieve themselves in buckets. And during the day, the prisoners were forced to do hard labor, and at night they slept on the ground, unfortunately. So over the following year, over 100 prisoners would arrive on Alcatraz. Now in 1867, a 2-story brick jail with individual cells was constructed due to overcrowding. Now in 1868, the U.S. Army made Alcatraz a permanent military prison. And in 1873, the military started to send Native Americans to Alcatraz who were considered troublesome. The first Native American would be Tom, I can't say his name, so I'm just going to say his last name. And he arrived June 5th of 1873, and he was unfortunately fatally shot only 2 days after his arrival by a guard, of course. And 4 months later, 2 more Native Americans would arrive, and their names would be Barnacle and Slowlock. Barnacle, he would unfortunately die from a disease that was associated with tuberculosis in May of 1875. And as the years passed, other Native Americans would also be sent to Alcatraz, of course, during this time, and most not having committed any actual crime. And in January of 1895, 19 members of the Hopi tribe from Arizona were imprisoned at Alcatraz. They were sent there because they refused to allow the federal government to have their children and sent to boarding schools in an attempt to Americanize them, which any person would do the same thing. So in September of the same year, they were realized when they were agreed to not interfere with the plans of the government. Now, in August of 1898, 4 prisoners that were previous soldiers, they were serving time for minor crimes, and the 4 decided to escape from the prison through the prison library, and they stole a rowboat. They were able to actually get able to row a considerable distance from the island without being noticed until one of the inmates missed a stroke and made a giant splash in the water, which caught the attention of one of the sentry officers. Now the officer opened fire and hit one of the inmates, causing him to fall into the boat screaming in pain. And so one of the inmates cleverly, this guy, he shouted back to the officer, he's like, "Don't shoot anymore, don't you see we got no oars, we surrender." And so after that, the officer stopped firing and went to go get assistance to go get them from the water. And once he was out of sight, the inmates pulled out their oars and started rowing to the mainland. And so the guards, they chased after them, but the inmates were able to get away and they never caught them. And in April of 1900, Alcatraz became a temporary healthway station for soldiers returning from the Philippine Islands that have actually contracted tropical diseases, unfortunately, and majority of the diseases were from dysentery. And so once admitted, these prisoners, just in general, they were searched and all their possessions were confiscated. They were then required to bathe and have their hair cut very short, and they had to shave all their facial hair off. The prisoners were then issued prison garb and a number, which that number would be what the prisoner would be identified for the duration of their term there. And the prisoners, they were also assigned to a class, and classes based on were privileges that they were allowed, and everyone was admitted into the second class, and they were either demoted or promoted depending on their conduct there. Now, third class prisoners were only allowed the letter and tobacco privilege. Second class prisoners were only allowed the library and entertainment privilege once a week, in addition to the letter and tobacco privilege. The first class prisoners, everybody wanted to be one of those, were allowed all the privileges of the second class, in addition to having an unlocked closed door to their individual quarters, and also talking in their quarters, and also they had ability for visiting in the day room. Now, if any prisoners that broke rules, they were subjected to harsh disciplinary measures that included hard labor details. They had a 24-pound ball and chain, quite interesting. Solitary lockdowns that would include a bread and water diet. In addition, Alcatraz, they had these disciplinary cages that prevented any inmate from sitting down. They were actually forced to stand up the entire duration of the time that they were in these chambers. And so that's our location for today, at least the first part. The second part would be coming to you shortly because there's just so much information. I had to break it down. And if you like the episodes of Booze and Brews, please like and share this video. And if you'd like to know more about other paranormal topics, you can also find me on my podcast with my co-host, Will Imerich, on the K&A Show, found on atlradiox.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram under Christina Kieffer. Thanks for watching today, and I will see y'all future ghosties later. Bye.